Why does society fear your sexual desires more than your violent ones? You can turn on the evening news and be flooded with images of war, death, and cruelty. And yet, the moment a film dares to explore desire, true, raw, unfiltered desire, it becomes taboo, censored, shamed, labeled as inappropriate. But what if this censorship isn't about morality at all? What if it's about power? Carl Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we repress the most are the ones that secretly control us. He called this the shadow, the hidden half of your psyche, made up of everything you were told to hide, deny, or forget. And at the center of that shadow? Sexuality. Not just the act, but the force, the creative, chaotic, instinctual energy that refuses to be tamed by culture, religion, or rational thought. The part of you that desires not what is allowed but what is forbidden. You've been taught that this part of you is dangerous, dirty, evil. And maybe it is. But Jung didn't believe in silencing the shadow. He believed in confronting it because only what is brought into the light can ever be healed. So why does our modern world still suppress this truth? Why does it worship sex on the surface while brutally punishing those who dare to speak of its deeper meaning? Because your sexual shadow is a mirror. It reveals the masks you wear, the compromises you make, the lies you tell to others and to yourself. This film isn't about explicit acts. It's about the psychological battlefield beneath them. It's about the truth no one dares to say aloud, that until you face the part of you you're most ashamed of, you will never be free. And that part, the one you bury beneath shame, denial, and projection, might just be the most powerful thing you have. So let's open the door Jung warned us about and step inside. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But what does it mean to truly accept yourself? It means looking at the parts you've spent your whole life avoiding, not just your fears, your failures, or your guilt, but the parts you secretly crave, the parts that don't align with who you pretend to be. And none of those parts are more powerful or more repressed than the sexual shadow. To Jung, the human psyche wasn't just a collection of thoughts and behaviors. It was a battlefield, a war between who we are on the surface and who we are beneath it. At the center of that war is the shadow self, a concept Jung described as the unconscious storehouse of everything we deny, reject, or fear about ourselves. But why did he place such emphasis on sexuality? Because unlike other instincts like hunger or fear, sexuality is uniquely human in how deeply it shapes identity, fantasy, guilt, and power. It's not just about reproduction, it's about meaning. It's tied to your imagination, your self-worth, your longing for connection, and your darkest impulses. According to Jung, libido wasn't just sexual energy. It was psychic energy, the raw life force of transformation. It could lead to creation, intimacy, and self-discovery, or when repressed, to anxiety, neurosis, addiction, and even violence. Think about it. We live in a world where people spend years crafting perfect identities, where sexuality is commercialized but never understood, where we say, "Be yourself," but punish anyone who steps outside the boundaries of acceptable desire. We've turned repression into a virtue, and Jung believed that was the beginning of madness. Because what you repress doesn't disappear. It festers. It morphs into dreams you can't explain, reactions you can't control, addictions you can't stop. You start projecting your own shame onto others, condemning in public what you crave in private. This is the nature of the sexual shadow. It's not just the urge to dominate, to submit, to explore, or to escape. It's the stories you've told yourself about what makes you good, and the terror of what lies outside that story. Jung parted ways with Freud because he believed the psyche couldn't be reduced to childhood trauma or suppressed libido. For Jung, sexuality was a symbol, a gateway to the soul, not just the body. He saw the sexual shadow as a spiritual crisis, a sign that the ego has become disconnected from the self. And yet, society keeps forcing that shadow deeper underground. We pathologize it, we moralize it, we hide it behind filters and algorithms and hashtags, but we never truly face it. And here's the uncomfortable truth Jung warned us about. What you don't own owns you. Your fantasies, your compulsions, your hidden desires, they are not anomalies, they are not sins. They are messages from the unconscious demanding to be heard. To deny them is to fracture your own soul. To confront them is to begin the journey of becoming whole. This doesn't mean acting on every desire. It means understanding them. It means asking, where did this come from? What does it represent? What does it say about me that I'm afraid to admit? The process is painful, brutal. It destroys the illusion of who you thought you were. But Jung believed that integration, not suppression, is the only path to freedom. Until you stop treating your shadow like an enemy, it will keep sabotaging your life from the inside out. So ask yourself, what part of your sexuality have you disowned? What impulse have you buried beneath your moral self-image? And what would happen if you stopped being afraid of it and started listening to it? Because the shadow doesn't want to control you. It wants to be seen. Every empire in history has done one thing the same. They feared sex more than death. From ancient Rome to Victorian England, from religious kingdoms to modern democracies, civilizations have always tried to control human sexuality. Not because it's immoral, but because it's powerful. Sexual energy, as Jung suggested, is life energy. It doesn't just create new bodies, it creates new selves. It stirs rebellion, inspires art, awakens passion, and breaks the illusion of conformity. And any force that threatens control must be silenced. Look at history. In medieval Europe, the church taught that even thinking about sex was a sin. Celibacy became a symbol of purity. But behind closed doors, those same leaders indulged in the very acts they condemned. Why? Because repression breeds obsession, and the more tightly a culture squeezes sexual expression, the more violently it leaks out, through scandals, secrets, and extremes. The Victorians banned sexual literature and cloaked women in layers of fabric. Yet prostitution in 19th century London was so rampant that entire districts were built around it. In public, shame. In private, obsession. This isn't hypocrisy. It's shadow projection on a societal scale. Cultures that fear their sexual shadow start projecting it onto others, calling them immoral, dangerous, or depraved. They build moral systems that say, we are clean, they are filthy. And in doing so, they avoid facing the chaos within. Even in modern times, sexuality is both worshipped and demonized. Advertisements use it to sell everything, from soap to soda, but when real people explore their desires outside cultural norms, they're shamed, punished, or pathologized. It's no accident. Sexual autonomy is political. If you control what people are allowed to feel, what they're allowed to want, you control them. Because the more ashamed a person feels of their inner world, the easier they are to manipulate. And this is what Jung understood long before modern psychology caught up, that civilizations, like individuals, have shadows, and within those shadows lies centuries of guilt, fear, and unacknowledged desire. It's why certain books get banned, why artists get silenced, why cultures invent purity rituals, family values, and laws that pretend to protect morality, when they're really protecting power. Your sexual shadow is not just yours, it's inherited. It carries the wounds of your ancestors, the dogmas of your culture, the stories of shame that were passed down through generations wrapped in silence, punishment, and denial. You are not just fighting your own repression, you are confronting an ancient, collective fear, the fear that if we were ever truly free, we might no longer fit the world they built for us. But the truth is this, that world was never built for wholeness. It was built to keep your shadow in chains, and the moment you start to unlock it, gently, honestly, without judgment, you begin to unravel the architecture of shame that has ruled humanity for thousands of years. That's not just psychological healing, it's revolution. Most people don't fall out of love, they fall out of fantasy. And that fantasy, about what love should feel like, what desire should look like, who you're supposed to be in a relationship, is built on everything you were taught to believe about yourself, and everything you were told to repress. This is where your sexual shadow becomes more than a private conflict. It becomes a silent poison inside your relationships. Carl Jung believed that the people we attract are rarely random. They are mirrors, reflections of our unconscious. We fall for those who awaken what we've buried. We project our desires onto them, and when they fail to keep playing the role we cast them in, we blame them instead of facing ourselves. This is the root of many failed relationships, not incompatibility, but shadow. Let's break it down. You meet someone. You're drawn to them, not just by looks or personality, but by a feeling, a pull. It's exciting, mysterious, almost magnetic. But what you're really feeling is projection. You're projecting parts of your psyche, especially the repressed sexual shadow, onto the other person. They represent what you're missing or what you've disowned. At first, this feels intoxicating. You feel seen. You say things like, "They complete me." But over time, reality sets in. The fantasy cracks. They reveal sides you didn't expect. Or you reveal sides you hope to hide. And suddenly, the attraction turns into fear, or resentment, or disgust. Why? Because relationships force the shadow to emerge. The sexual shadow in particular doesn't just shape who you're attracted to, it shapes how you handle vulnerability, power, jealousy, rejection, and emotional risk. It determines whether you use sex to connect or to control, whether you seek intimacy or avoid it behind endless pleasure. Unconsciously, many people fear that exposing their deepest desires will lead to abandonment. That if someone truly saw what lies beneath, the kinks, the fantasies, the wounded longing, they'd walk away. So what do? We split ourselves in two. We become the safe version in relationships, the good partner, the nice guy, the sweet girl, and suppress the raw, chaotic parts we're afraid to reveal. But those parts don't vanish. They slip out sideways. In passive aggression, in affairs, in sudden distance, in a chronic feeling of being unfulfilled or bored. Not because the partner changed, but because the repressed self was never invited into the relationship to begin with. And worse, some people do the opposite. They become addicted to intensity, to drama, to chaos. Because only in extreme emotional swings does the shadow get to speak. But this doesn't lead to intimacy either. It leads to exhaustion. This is the trap. Without integration, your relationships become either too tame to awaken you or too chaotic to sustain you. Jung believed that true intimacy begins when both people recognize and accept their own shadows, when the relationship becomes a container for healing, not a stage for performance. It requires brutal honesty, not just with your partner, but with yourself. You must ask, what parts of myself am I hiding? What desires have I never spoken aloud? Am I seeking connection or validation? Am I trying to be loved or trying to be good? The goal is not to act out every fantasy. The goal is to understand them, to integrate them. So you're not controlled by shame, but empowered by self-awareness. Because only when you stop fearing your own depth can you truly meet someone else in theirs. Love isn't about perfection. It's about wholeness, and no one is whole without their shadow. Section 5. The Algorithm of Shame. How Modern Culture Manufactures. Sexual confusion in ancient times. Shame came from the pulpit. Today, it comes from the algorithm. Your sexual shadow is no longer shaped only by parents, priests, or teachers. It's shaped by invisible machines, curating what you see, desire, fear, and compare yourself to. Day after day, click after click, you don't even notice it. That's the genius of it. Scroll through social media, and you'll see a bizarre, Contradiction. Hypersexualized content promoted everywhere, yet conversations about desire, consent, intimacy, and shame are buried, mocked, or dismissed. This isn't an accident. It's a system. A system that feeds your sexual curiosity just enough to keep you hooked, but never enough to make you whole. Carl Jung warned that when the unconscious is ignored, it will manifest as neurosis. Today, that neurosis is cultural. We live in an era of hypervisibility and emotional illiteracy, where people are constantly exposed to idealized images of sex and beauty, but given no tools to navigate their own inner chaos. The result? Confusion, alienation, addiction, repression. You're taught to desire perfection but hate your own reflection. You're told to be liberated but punished for honesty. You're seduced by extremes but denied emotional depth. And slowly, your shadow begins to fracture. Porn addiction becomes rampant, not because people are immoral, but because they're starved of authentic intimacy. Dating becomes gamified, dehumanized. People become brands, bodies become content, and in the background the algorithm keeps optimizing for attention, not connection. This is not sexual freedom. This is engineered fragmentation. Every scroll, every click, every like becomes part of a digital mirror, a distorted one. You see who gets rewarded: the bold, the flawless, the provocative. And unconsciously, you start editing yourself. You silence your questions. You suppress your awkwardness. You filter your shadow until it no longer looks human. But what Jung would ask is this: what happens to a society that ignores its collective shadow? It doesn't vanish. It festers, and we see it everywhere, on incel forums, in hookup culture burnout, in the rise of loneliness and depression, in the inability to form lasting, emotionally safe relationships. We are drowning in exposure and starving for understanding. The system profits from your shame, because the more fragmented you are, the easier you are to influence. And so the algorithm doesn't just show you content, it shows you your place. It tells you who's desirable and who isn't. It tells you what love should look like. It tells you that you're either winning the game or not worthy of playing. This is digital shadow projection on a mass scale. And until you learn to question it, until you pull your attention inward, into the uncomfortable space of your own longing, you will live as a stranger to yourself, chasing shadows that were never yours to begin with. True sexual power doesn't come from image. It comes from integration. It's the quiet strength of someone who has faced their desire without shame, who knows what they want, not because culture told them, but because they listened to the deeper truth within. And no algorithm can sell you that, because that kind of wholeness can't be manufactured. It can only be earned, in silence, in shadow, and in radical self-honesty. Section 6. Embracing the shadow. How to reclaim your sexual power without shame. There's a moment in every soul's journey. A moment when the masks begin to crack, the illusions wear thin, and the fantasies no longer satisfy. That's when the shadow calls, not as a monster, but as an invitation. Carl Jung didn't believe in destroying the shadow. He believed in integrating it, because every part of you, your cravings, your taboos, your hidden fantasies, is not a flaw to erase. It's a fragment to re-own. To reclaim your sexual shadow is not to indulge it blindly. It's not about acting out every impulse or rebelling against every rule. It's about going into the basement of your psyche and turning on the light. And here's the paradox. What you fear most in yourself is often the key to your greatest freedom. Most people try to escape their shadow by becoming better, more moral, more disciplined, more controlled. But the more you suppress, the more power you give the very thing you're running from. Jung's message was different. You don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So how do you begin? Start by noticing your projections. Who do you admire obsessively? Who do you resent without reason? These are clues. They often reveal what you've disowned in yourself: your power, your eroticism, your rawness. Then, explore your desires with curiosity, not judgment. What arouses you? What do you fantasize about when no one's watching? Don't moralize it, don't label it as good or bad. Just observe. Just listen. Your fantasies are not instructions. They're information. They tell you where your energy lives, where your aliveness hides. Next, create space for the shadow to breathe. This could be through journaling, therapy, art, or deep conversations with people you trust. The goal isn't to fix the shadow, it's to see it. Because visibility diffuses shame, and shame is what keeps your shadow in chains. But most importantly, remember this. You are not your shadow. You are the one holding the shadow. The part of you that can witness the chaos without becoming it. The part of you that can feel desire without being consumed by it. The part of you that can embrace contradiction without needing to be right. This is power, not dominance, not performance, but presence. Sexual power isn't loud. It's not about seduction or conquest. It's the quiet confidence of someone who has nothing to hide. Someone who has walked through the underworld of their psyche and come back not with shame, but with understanding. In a world obsessed with image, that kind of authenticity is revolutionary. Because when you reclaim your sexual shadow, you stop being manipulated by shame. You stop projecting your wounds onto others. You stop chasing approval, and you begin to love, not from fear, not from fantasy, but from wholeness. Wholeness is not about being perfect, it's about being real. It's about owning every part of yourself, even the parts that scare you, especially the parts that scare you, because that's where your truth lives. And in a world that profits from your confusion, the most radical thing you can do is know yourself, all of yourself, even the shadows, especially the shadows. You were never meant to be pure. You were meant to be whole. The world will tell you otherwise. It will sell you perfection, shame you for your hunger, praise you for your restraint, and punish you for your truth. But beneath all that noise, there's something ancient. A fire that has burned quietly within every human soul across time. The sacred chaos of desire. The divine tension between shadow and light. Carl Jung understood this. That to be fully human is not to choose between your higher self and your primal self, but to integrate both. To walk as a complete being, not a fragmented performance. You are not broken for feeling too much. You are not dangerous for being curious. You are not unworthy because your shadow makes you uncomfortable. You are simply human, and that is more than enough. Because the truth is, every empire, every religion, every culture that tried to control the human spirit always began by trying to control the body. Why? Because the moment you reclaim your own instincts, your own sexuality, your own emotional reality, is the moment you become ungovernable. Not reckless, not cruel, but free. Free to know yourself deeply. Free to love with presence. Free to walk through this life with a calm defiance that says, I have nothing to hide, I know who I am. And that kind of freedom terrifies systems built on obedience. So they will call you sinful. They will call you deviant. They will call you lost. But if you've truly met your shadow, you'll smile. Because you'll know they're not talking about you. They're talking about the parts of you they still fear in themselves. And that's the final truth. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's your birthright. Not something to fear, but something to integrate. And the moment you do, you don't just reclaim your sexuality. You reclaim your humanity.